and then we're going to break for lunch. And remember, bring your lunch back in, because we're going to start in half an hour with a panel.
Yes.
Last year I wrote, and the Washington State Medical Association took to the legislature a motion for the distribution of naloxone in a user-friendly manner, using nasal insufflation, little atomizer, to be dispensed by peers who were trained by information on a DVD. Failed. Bottom line, soft on drugs.
Right. Now, legislation like that went through in Illinois. Drug Policy Alliance and other organizations are working on it around the country. If that legislation gets going here, yesterday, Tom Gobert from the Medical Marijuana Organization invited some legislators to sit down with us. One of the ideas they jumped at was doing something like Good Samaritan 911 and maybe naloxone in Montana. So if you get behind it, stuff might start to happen here.
We got backing from ACLU, thank you, and we also are reintroducing that measure this year.
Yeah, and there's a fantastic state legislator, Roger Goodman, who comes out of the drug law reform field, who's leading, I think, some of those efforts as well. I should also say, if you want more information, drugpolicy.org is our website. If you want to come to a remarkable gathering every 2 years, there's an international conference on drug policy reform. This year, it's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, November 12th to 14th. Not very expensive. Some people in Montana I know are coming down, but you will see a world of people across the spectrum of drug laws, drug use, politics, what have you, all there together.
Data on incarceration of physicians for inappropriate prescribing. I don't mean they're dealing or something. I mean they got nailed because the DEA found a little glitch and threw them in and confiscated everything.
Well, I don't know the data. What I do is I hear the stories that pop up, and sometimes my organization gets involved. Sometimes we submit amicus briefs on behalf of the physician. You all know the case of Bill Hurwitz, the doc in Virginia, who, is he behind bars now? But I mean, who went through a horrific time. He was an example of somebody who was really doing courageous practice of medicine, but who also wasn't playing ball with the regulators and others in the field. But the punishment was absurd. There are other cases in the verse, but I don't know the stats. I was encouraged. I don't know how you all feel about this, but there was a case a few years ago where one physician was in fact reprimanded for failing to prescribe effective opioid medication. And I think, I know nobody likes legal suits and legal action, but when all the legal action's on one side about physicians who maybe do too much in the eyes of the DEA, I think there needs to be some balance there. But I don't know the stats.
For myself, I'm a subscriber of drugpolicy.org, and I practice harm reduction. And I guess the only thing I get a little bit concerned sometimes about these discussions is that, for me, yes, people are naturally going to have a dependence on opiate medications in their care plans, and that's not an issue for me. The issue for me with any substance is really, the degree to which they're going to have problems with addiction, that it may affect them physically or spiritually, emotionally, affect how they are in their relationships, that kind of thing. But, so for me, the issue isn't that addiction does develop for a certain number of people. The question is, do we deal with it from a public health perspective? Do we try to provide them those resources? Do we fund those resources? Or do we deal with it from more of a criminal perspective? And I know that for myself, having started in the addiction field in the 70s, it has changed, where before, I started in Washington, it was a public health orientation in Washington, and now, increasing what's developed is that a person who practices addiction medicine as a therapist becomes patient of informed a great deal of the time. So it is a different relationship with the client than used to be the case.
I just want to say, I think that, more and more drug treatment is being incorporated within the criminal justice system at the expense of community-based treatment. More and more, if you're poor and you have a drug problem, the only way to get treatment is to get arrested first, which is really crazy. And the notion of physicians having to, be involved in drug testing where a dirty urine means incarceration seems to be fairly antithetical to basic notions of physician-patient confidentiality as well as basic Hippocratic oath, the first do no harm. The notion of drug testing where the testing is only used for therapeutic purposes and not for punitive purposes is pivotal. When we won Prop 36, the ballot issue in California for treatment instead of incarceration, back in 2000, we did not include any money for drug testing. And when the drug court judges came back and demanded money in the legislative process, we were able to weave in their language that drug testing should be used primarily for therapeutic purposes, not punitive purposes, like a scale on a weight control thing. But what I also experienced, and it was enormously frustrating when we try to push for alternatives to incarceration for people who are addicted to drugs, is that the treatment community self-defines itself as disempowering. That they know they have a role to play, but in a way financially they're depending upon the crumbs coming off the side of the table from the drug war, by getting that little piece. And they also define themselves, well, cops are big and strong, we can small, you know, we don't have that role. So there's an element of, it's where people involved in the health side stand up and demand as a matter of principle that things will change, but that self-definition as relatively weaker than others has stood in the way. I also should just say one personal thing. You know, I don't have, as I say, any inherent bias as if you could opioids, marijuana, or for drugs as opposed to non-drugs. I personally, you know, lived through horrific experiences with lower back pain and sciatica, L5, L4, L5, L5S1, herniated disc, get the operation, and then a friend of mine, Dr. Andrew Weil, who some of you know, the integrative medicine guy, recommended I read a book by John Sarno. How many of you familiar with the John Sarno approach, I'm curious? You know, and for me, the John Sarno approach, this book, Healing Back Pain, that was transformative. That turned out to be the thing that worked for me. It got me angry at some of the physicians who were going to do surgery instead. You know, it taught me to transform my understanding of the mind-body relationship. You know, it led to me having my own theories that maybe the biggest problems with opioid overdoses right now have to deal with them being used for sorts of pain that may be on some level very real physically, but actually has some psychological underpinnings in a way that's not true of other sorts of pain. But I don't know. All I know is that it's a matter of being ideology-free and with no prejudice or biases about what the medication or intervention is called, and focusing on that bottom line.
Hey, we're going to break now, and you can spin around, and we'll be...
Next time. Okay, thank you very much.